The crystal champagne flute slipped from Maxwell Thornton's fingers, shattering against the marble floor of his penthouse. His face drained of all color as he stared at the photograph the young girl held up to him. Those eyes, he would recognize them anywhere. They were the same ones that had watched over him during the darkest nights of his childhood, when he had nothing but dreams to keep him warm. "What did you just say?" Maxwell whispered, his voice barely audible over the murmur of the lavish charity gala he was hosting. The girl, no more than 12, stood her ground despite the intimidating figure Maxwell cut in his tailored suit. "My mother works for you, sir. She's been your housekeeper for 5 years. And this boy," she pointed at the photograph again, "he lived with me at Sunnyvale Orphanage. His name is Elijah. And he's dying." Maxwell's world began to spin. How could this be happening now, just when everything he'd built was finally perfect? The truth was, nothing in Maxwell Thornton's life had ever been perfect. Not even close. 25 years earlier, Maxwell had been just another forgotten child at Sunnyvale Orphanage, a crumbling facility on the outskirts of the city. Back then, he wasn't Maxwell Thornton, billionaire tech mogul and philanthropist. He was just Max, a skinny boy with second-hand clothes and a mind that wouldn't stop dreaming of a better future. The orphanage housed 30 children, each with their own story of loss and abandonment. Max had arrived when he was 6, after his mother succumbed to an illness they couldn't afford to treat. His father had disappeared years before, leaving nothing behind but fading memories and a small wooden chess piece, a knight, that Max kept hidden in his sock drawer. Life at Sunnyvale was a daily struggle for survival. The building was always cold in winter and stifling in summer. Meals were meager, and affection was even scarcer. The staff did what they could with limited resources, but there was never enough of anything to go around, except perhaps for loneliness. That was abundant. Max might have been swallowed by despair if not for Elijah. Elijah arrived at Sunnyvale when Max was 10. 3 years younger than Max, Elijah was tiny for his age, with a mop of unruly dark hair and eyes that seemed too old for his face. Unlike most new arrivals who spent their first days crying or withdrawn, Elijah carried himself with quiet dignity. He spoke little but observed everything. Their friendship began over a shared book, a tattered copy of The Little Prince that Max had salvaged from a donation box. He'd found Elijah tracing the illustrations with his finger one rainy afternoon in the common room. "You can borrow it if you want," Max had offered. Elijah had looked up, surprised. "I can't read very well," he admitted softly. "I could read it to you," Max suggested, and something in Elijah's expression shifted, a flicker of hope, perhaps, or simply gratitude for the kindness. That was the beginning. Every night after lights out, Max would sneak to Elijah's bed with a flashlight he'd repaired, and they would huddle under the thin blankets while Max read stories in hushed tones. Books became their escape, their window to worlds beyond the orphanage walls. As months turned into years, their bond deepened. They protected each other from the occasional bullies, shared their meager possessions, and most importantly, they shared dreams. Max would talk about becoming an inventor, creating things that would change the world. Elijah wanted to be a doctor, to help people who couldn't afford medical care, like Max's mother. "We'll do it together," Max would promise. "We'll get out of here and make something of ourselves." Elijah would always nod, his eyes bright with belief in Max's words. "Brothers forever," he would say, and they would lock pinkies in a solemn vow. But fate had other plans. When Max was 14, a couple visited Sunnyvale looking to adopt. The Thorntons were wealthy and childless, searching for a bright child to mold in their image. They were immediately drawn to Max's intelligence and ambition during their visit. The day the adoption papers were finalized should have been the happiest of Max's life. Instead, it was torn in two, joy at finally having a family, and devastation at leaving Elijah behind. "Take me with you," Elijah had pleaded, his voice breaking as they said goodbye in the dormitory. "Tell them you won't go without me." Max had tried. He'd begged the Thorntons to consider adopting Elijah too, but they were firm. They wanted only one child. One perfect heir to their fortune. "I'll come back for you," Max promised, pressing the wooden knight into Elijah's palm. "As soon as I'm old enough, I'll come back and get you out. Keep this until then." Elijah had nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Brothers forever," he whispered. "Brothers forever," Max echoed, before being led away to his new life. The Thorntons gave Max everything he could have materially desired, the finest education, connections to influential people, and eventually, seed money to start his first tech company. They also gave him a new name, Maxwell, believing it sounded more distinguished. They molded him into their vision of success, and he excelled beyond their expectations. But they couldn't erase his memories of Sunnyvale, or of Elijah. For years, Max wrote letters to his friend, sending them to the orphanage. He never received replies. When he turned 18, he drove back to Sunnyvale, only to discover it had been shut down 2 years earlier due to funding cuts. The children had been dispersed to other facilities, and no one could, or would, tell him where Elijah had been sent. Max hired private investigators, but the trail had gone cold. Foster care records were sealed, and without Elijah's full name or birth date, details Max realized with horror he had never thought to ask, the search seemed impossible. As years passed and his fortune grew, Max never stopped looking, but he buried his guilt deeper and deeper beneath layers of success and philanthropy. He donated millions to children's causes, built new orphanages with better conditions, established scholarship funds for foster children. Each act of charity was both atonement and hope. Perhaps somewhere, Elijah would benefit from his efforts. Perhaps somewhere, Elijah would see his name in the news and reach out. But the call never came. Until now, when the past had walked right into his penthouse in the form of his housekeeper's daughter, holding a photograph that shattered the carefully constructed walls around his heart. "Where is he?" Maxwell demanded, his voice regaining its strength as he knelt to the girl's level. "Where is Elijah now?" The girl, Clara, he suddenly remembered her name, looked at him with solemn eyes. "He's at City Memorial Hospital. My mom recognized him when we visited my grandmother there last week. He's very sick, sir. Cancer." Maxwell stood abruptly, pulling out his phone. "Cancel everything," he barked at his assistant who hovered nearby. "And get my car ready. Now." As he strode toward the elevator, leaving his bewildered guests behind, Clara ran after him. "Sir. Wait. There's something else you should know." Maxwell paused, his finger hovering over the elevator button. "He still has it," Clara said. "The wooden chess piece. He told my mother it was given to him by the only brother he ever had." The elevator doors opened, but Maxwell couldn't move. After all these years, Elijah had kept his promise. Had Maxwell kept his? The drive to City Memorial was a blur. Maxwell sat rigid in the back of his Bentley, Clara beside him, her mother, his housekeeper Maria, in the front passenger seat, looking nervous and apologetic. "I'm sorry for the interruption to your party, Mr. Thornton," Maria said. Clara shouldn't have. "No," Maxwell cut her off. "Don't apologize. You've done me the greatest service anyone could." He turned to Clara. "Tell me everything you know about him." As the car navigated through evening traffic, Clara shared what little she knew. Elijah had aged out of the foster care system at 18 and had managed to put himself through community college working multiple jobs. He'd been studying to become a nurse, not quite a doctor, but still in medicine as he'd always dreamed. His cancer had been diagnosed late, stage 4 already, because he had no health insurance and had ignored the symptoms while working to pay his tuition. "The doctors say he has maybe a month," Clara finished quietly. "Maybe less." Maxwell closed his eyes, fighting back the wave of emotion threatening to overwhelm him. All these years, all his resources, and Elijah had been struggling alone, his dreams cut short by the same cruel lack of healthcare that had taken Max's mother. When they arrived at the hospital, Maxwell moved with purpose. His name and wealth opened doors immediately, despite the late hour. A nervous administrator led them to the oncology ward, explaining in hushed tones that Mr. Walker, Elijah Walker, was not expected to make it through the week. Outside the door to room 412, Maxwell paused. What would he say after all these years? What could possibly make up for his broken promise? He might be sleeping, the nurse warned. The medication makes him very drowsy. Maxwell nodded and slowly pushed the door open. The room was dimly lit, with only a small lamp casting shadows across the walls. Medical equipment beeped softly, monitoring vital signs that were growing weaker by the day. And there, in the hospital bed that seemed to swallow his thin frame, was Elijah. Time had changed him, as it had changed Maxwell. His once unruly hair was now sparse from chemotherapy. His face was gaunt, skin stretched tight over cheekbones. But his eyes, when they fluttered open at the sound of the door, were the same. Deep, thoughtful, and now widening in disbelief. Max? The name came out as barely a whisper. Maxwell moved to the bedside, his legs nearly giving way beneath him. Elijah, he breathed, taking the frail hand that reached for him. I found you. Elijah's lips curved into a weak smile. Took you long enough. And just like that, 25 years melted away. They were boys again, sharing secrets under blankets, making plans for a future that had taken such different paths than they'd imagined. Maxwell pulled a chair close to the bed and sat, still holding Elijah's hand. I looked for you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. When Sunnyvale closed. I know, Elijah interrupted. I saw your name everywhere over the years. Maxwell Thornton, tech genius, philanthropist. He paused, his breathing labored. I was proud of you. Still am. I broke my promise, Maxwell said, the guilt he'd carried for decades finally finding voice. I said I'd come back for you. Elijah's fingers tightened slightly around Maxwell's. You're here now. From his pocket, Elijah withdrew something small and placed it in Maxwell's palm, the wooden knight, worn smooth from years of handling but still recognizable. Brothers forever, Elijah whispered. Maxwell closed his fingers around the chess piece, tears flowing freely now. Brothers forever, he echoed. That night marked the beginning of a new chapter. Maxwell refused to leave Elijah's side, setting up a makeshift office in the hospital room. He brought in the best oncologists from around the world, funded experimental treatments, and used every connection he had to fight for Elijah's life. The doctors were skeptical at first. Elijah's cancer was aggressive, his body weakened by years of overwork and inadequate health care. But Maxwell was relentless, and Elijah, perhaps energized by the reunion with his childhood friend, fought with unexpected strength. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Against all odds, Elijah began to respond to treatment. The cancer didn't disappear, but it stopped spreading, giving them precious time. During those months of treatment, Maxwell and Elijah rebuilt their bond. They talked for hours, filling in the gaps of their separate journeys. Maxwell learned that after Sunnyvale closed, Elijah had bounced between foster homes, none of them providing the stability or affection he needed. He'd worked since he was 15, saving every penny for his education, determined to make something of himself despite the obstacles. I never blamed you, Elijah insisted one evening as they shared a meal in his hospital room, real food smuggled in by Maxwell to replace the bland hospital fare. You were a kid too. We both were. Maxwell shook his head. I had everything handed to me. The Thorntons gave me every advantage, and I took it without looking back. And look what you've done with it, Elijah countered. All those children you've helped through your foundations. The orphanages you've built. He smiled. You kept your promise in your own way. But Maxwell couldn't absolve himself so easily. The contrast between their lives haunted him, his wealth and success against Elijah's struggle and illness. It seemed a cruel joke of fate that their paths had diverged so dramatically from the same starting point. As Elijah's condition stabilized, Maxwell made a decision. He called his lawyers and amended his will, naming Elijah as his heir and the future head of the Thornton Foundation. But that was just the beginning. 6 months after their reunion, when Elijah was strong enough to leave the hospital for short periods, Maxwell took him to see a building in the city center, a former corporate headquarters that Maxwell had purchased and was renovating. "What is this place?" Elijah asked as they stood in the spacious lobby, construction workers busy around them. Maxwell smiled. "This is the future home of the Walker Thornton Medical Center. A hospital where no one will be turned away for lack of insurance. Where children like we were will receive the care they need, regardless of their circumstances." Elijah stared at him, speechless. "And I want you to run it," Maxwell continued. "Once you're well enough. Your experience as a patient, your medical training, your compassion, you're exactly who should be in charge." Elijah's eyes filled with tears. "Max, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Maxwell urged. "Say you'll help me make this right. Not just for us, but for all the children who are where we once were." Elijah looked around at the space, seeing not what it was but what it could become. "Brothers in business, now?" he asked with a small smile. "Brothers in everything," Maxwell corrected. The road to Elijah's recovery was long and not without setbacks. There were days when the pain was overwhelming, when the treatment seemed worse than the disease itself. But Maxwell never left his side, rearranging his entire life to be there for the friend he had once left behind. A year after their reunion, the Walker Thornton Medical Center opened its doors. Elijah, thin but standing tall, cut the ribbon alongside Maxwell. The center became a beacon of hope in the community, providing care to thousands who would otherwise go without. As for Maxwell and Elijah, they became inseparable. Maxwell moved Elijah into his penthouse during recovery, and later helped him find an apartment in the same building. They worked together daily, their complementary skills making them a formidable team in both business and philanthropy. The wooden knight found a new home on a shelf in Maxwell's office, a reminder of promises broken and kept, of a brotherhood that had survived against all odds. 5 years after Clara had brought that fateful photograph to the charity gala, she stood on a stage receiving a scholarship from the Walker Thornton Foundation to pursue her own dream of becoming a doctor. In the audience, her mother sat proudly beside Maxwell and Elijah, now partners in all senses of the word. "We've come full circle," Elijah remarked as they watched Clara accept her award. Maxwell nodded, thinking of the frightened boys they had once been, huddled together against a world that seemed determined to separate them. "Not a circle," he corrected. "A spiral. We're moving upward, bringing others with us." Elijah smiled, his health restored though he would always carry the scars of his battle. "Brothers forever," he said softly. "Brothers forever," Maxwell agreed, knowing now that some bonds transcend time, distance, and even the cruelest twists of fate. As Clara finished her acceptance speech, she looked directly at Maxwell and Elijah. "And I want to thank the two men who taught me that family isn't always about blood, it's about who stays by your side when everyone else walks away." The audience erupted in applause, but Maxwell barely heard it. His attention was fixed on Elijah, on the miracle of having found him again, on the second chance they'd been given to fulfill the promise made by two orphaned boys who refused to let go of hope. In that moment, Maxwell knew with absolute certainty that all his wealth, all his success, meant nothing compared to the treasure of reclaiming his brother. Some fortunes couldn't be measured in dollars and cents, but in the wealth of a bond that neither time nor circumstance could break. If you found this story touching, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more heartwarming tales of reunion, redemption, and the unbreakable bonds that define true family. Remember, sometimes the